40 minutes in line for a package turned into the most honest conversation of my life. When the postal system goes down, time stops dead. Not like in the movies, but in a brutal, everyday sort of way. Under the hum of the old air conditioner and the steady thud of Frank's stamp, the gray-haired clerk at counter 3, who had just hit the restart button for the nth time. The woman next to me sighed and shifted her weight again, clutching a thick cardboard envelope with a university seal tightly in her hands. She kept staring at the display board, ticket number 42, as if it were personally responsible for her problems. "If we get out of here before lunch, it'll be a genuine Christmas miracle," I said, stepping aside a bit to give her some room by the windowsill. She snapped her head around. Only then did I get a good look at her face. A slightly messy lock of dark hair, tired but incredibly lively brown eyes, and a deep crease between her eyebrows. "It's July," she replied sharply, though the corners of her mouth gave a subtle twitch. "And this isn't a miracle, it's the post office. Around here, even time moves at the speed of a government employee right before their lunch break." "Davide," I offered my hand, skipping the formalities. "Master of giving second life to things others consider useless junk." She hesitated for a second before shaking my forearm. Her grip turned out to be surprisingly firm. "Valentina, I teach history to teenagers who are convinced Napoleon founded TikTok. And if these documents don't make it to Chicago by tomorrow noon, my professional reputation goes up in smoke." "It won't go up in smoke." I pulled a small block of basswood from my jacket pocket, something I always carry as a stress reliever, and began running my thumb slowly over it. "At 42, my back reacts to drafts and my eyes to these bureaucratic tricks. Frank at counter 3 does this every half hour. He pretends the system froze so he can solve crosswords under the desk. Look at his left shoulder. It moves rhythmically whenever he fills in the letters." Valentina narrowed her eyes, watching the old clerk. 3 seconds later, she let out a soft, almost soundless laugh. That laugh completely transformed her face, stripping away the heavy, tense mask she had walked in with. 11 letters across," she whispered. "Every citizen's worst headache. Bureaucracy," we said in unison, locking eyes. "Your 42 years have given you sharp eyes, Davide," Valentina noted, glancing at the piece of wood in my hands. "Though a guy with a jacket dusted in sawdust rubbing a block of wood in line still looks a little suspicious. I just like giving a second chance to things everyone else gave up on," I returned her smile. "Wood calms you down. It remembers everything. The rain, the sun, the wind. It's in no rush, unlike us." "A second chance is a luxury, Davide. Not all things and not all people deserve one." "Everyone deserves one," I countered calmly. "The only question is how much patience you're willing to spend sanding away the rough spots." Right then, the display flashed, "Ticket 42, counter 3." Valentina grabbed her envelope, and 5 minutes later we were out of that stifling office and onto the warm city street, thick with the smell of roasted coffee, street food, and exhaust from passing traffic. That same day, we grabbed a drink at a corner cafe down the block. She made her boundaries clear right away. After a rough divorce, she wasn't looking for romance. I agreed completely. After 2 years on my own, my freedom felt far too precious. We were simply 2 adults in the city who had survived the post office together. From that day on, it became our tradition. Every Sunday morning at 10, we met near the fountain in the central square. We walked through the narrow, historic side streets, and I showed her old brass door handles or solid oak frames, while she told me stories about the people who used to live in those houses. Gradually, without even noticing it, we fell into an easy, informal rhythm, like 2 people who understood each other's humor and exhaustion all too well. It was an easy, comfortable friendship. until one evening Valentina called me herself. There was a clear edge of panic in her voice, though she tried to hide it behind a dry, professional tone. "Davide, you mentioned you knew your way around antique wood and its quirks." "What happened, Valentina?" I set down my wood-carving chisel, wiping my hands clean of stain. "The upstairs neighbors had a pipe burst while no one was home," she said in one breath. "I came back and it was raining from my study ceiling. The floor was covered in water. By the time I found the building supervisor, shut off the main valve and soaked up what I could with towels, my desk had been sitting in that puddle for nearly an hour. The bottom of the legs turned dark and swelled up completely. It's my grandfather's desk, Davide. Is it going to rot?" "Take a breath," I said, taking off my apron. "Don't touch anything else. I'm heading over right now to check it out." 20 minutes later, I was walking up the stairs to her apartment above the bakery. Valentina's place smelled like dried mint and damp plaster. The door to her study was open. Valentina was standing near the window holding a bucket. To avoid soaking her long, light skirt while mopping up the water, she had tied the front hems in a knot around her waist. Seeing her slender legs and elegant ankles flecked with water droplets made me hold my breath for a second. In that vulnerable, everyday moment, there was so much genuine, mature grace that my heart did an unexpected flip. In the middle of the room stood a massive walnut desk from the 1950s. The floor was mostly dry by now, but dark, wet bands 5 or 6 inches high were clearly visible around the base of all 4 legs. The wood had swallowed the water like a dry sponge. I knelt beside one of the legs, pulled out a small pocket flashlight and a tiny restoration spatula. I tapped on the wood, then ran my finger along the underside. Valentina stepped closer, held her skirt, and sat down on the floor right beside me. She was so close I caught the faint trace of her perfume, notes of bergamot and bitter almond. "So, Davide," she asked, holding her breath and looking straight into my eyes, "is it ruined or will it dry out on its own?" "If we leave it to dry like this, the finish will bubble and the wood will warp and split with mold," I said, forcing myself to focus on the walnut grain instead of her eyes. "But if I take it to my shop for a week, strip the lower finish, dry it out properly under heat lamps, and treat it with oil, it'll last another 50 years. Valentina let out a long sigh of relief, and for the first time all evening, let a smile break through. "Thank you, Davide. You really are a lifesaver." "Don't thank me just yet." I pointed the beam of light deep underneath, right beneath the tabletop, where an old plywood panel on the back wall had loosened slightly from the humidity. "Looks like when your grandfather built this desk, he hid a little secret inside." "What secret?" she asked, squinting and leaning in closer. Using the spatula, I carefully lifted the edge of the loose panel and slid out a small paper envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with a piece of brittle red wax from a hidden compartment under the top. "Seems this desk holds more than just your memories, Valentina." I stood up and handed her the find. "Here, this was tucked inside the false wall." Valentina took the envelope slowly, as if it were made of fragile glass. Her fingers, still damp from cleaning up, trembled slightly. She brought it close to the flashlight beam and read the clear calligraphic handwriting written across it. "For Francesca, when the sea calms down," she read aloud, her eyebrow raising in surprise. "A relative of yours?" I asked, wiping my hands on a cloth. "My grandmother's name was Julia. They lived together for 54 years in this very house." "Old furniture often hides more than its owners are willing to share in life," I said. "The dried wax proves this letter was never taken out. It sat in that compartment for at least half a century." Valentina walked over to the window, where the late July sun was already washing the city rooftops in a warm copper glow. She traced her thumb over the seal, but didn't hurry to open the envelope. "You know, Davide," she sighed softly, without turning around to face me. My grandfather was a very quiet man. He worked at the shipyard, drank a small glass of whiskey on the porch every evening, and never raised his voice. I always thought his life was completely transparent, like a glass of water. "No one's life is transparent, Valentina," I noted, stepping up to the desk to test if I could lift the top on my own. "There are just people who know how to keep their cracks hidden inside, like this walnut. Finish on the outside, decades of grain underneath." She turned around, and that same mature, slightly self-deprecating spark returned to her eyes. "So, what do we do now, Master Davide? Read someone else's letter, or pretend we never found anything? If you ask me as a restorer, wood only yields its secrets when it feels the time is right," I offered a slight smile. "But if you ask me as a guy who spends every Sunday listening to your stories about the city's history, I'll tell you this: you're a teacher, Valentina. Curiosity is your professional hazard. You wouldn't be able to sleep tonight anyway if you didn't find out who Francesca was." With a swift motion, she untied the knot in her skirt, and the light fabric fell softly back down to her ankles. "You've figured me out entirely too well over these past 2 months, Davide," she said, though there was no annoyance in her voice. She broke the edge of the wax seal. The paper envelope opened with a dry crinkle. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper and a dried, withered sprig of lavender that instantly crumbled into dust the moment it touched the air. Valentina unfolded the letter, ran her eyes over the first few lines, and her face suddenly softened. "What does it say?" I asked, leaving the desk alone. These are apologies that were never delivered, Davide," Valentina said slowly, raising a touched look up at me. "The date, spring of '58. Grandfather writes to his first sweetheart, Francesca, who had left for Chicago. He writes that he can't leave the city and his father's workshop, even though he loves her, and that he built this desk with his own hands to gather his memories of her and let her go. And he hid it away for a lifetime right under his own desktop," I said softly, "so he wouldn't hurt anyone and could protect Grandmother Julia's peace of mind." "He never sent it," Valentina whispered, catching the faint scent of dried lavender. "He chose the life he had, but kept a small corner for the one that could have been." She looked at me, and that same current of deep, mature understanding passed between us once more. "Tomorrow morning at 9, I'll come by with my assistant and haul the desk to the shop," I said gently, touching her shoulder lightly, without any pressure. "Right now you need to get some rest, and maybe have a glass of wine instead of coffee." "Davide," she stopped me right at the study doorway. "What do we do with this letter once you've restored the desk?" I smiled faintly and pointed to the dry specks of lavender resting on her palm. "We fix the panel, tuck the letter safe inside, and leave it right where it belongs. Some things are meant to stay in history." The next morning at 9 sharp, my old truck was parked right below Valentina's balcony. The air smelled of fresh pastries from the bakery downstairs and morning coffee. My assistant, Matt, and I loaded the heavy walnut desk onto the truck. Valentina brought us 2 mugs of hot coffee right out to the street, watching as we carefully wrapped the water-damaged legs in soft flannel blankets. "Don't panic," I smiled, handing back her empty mug. "In 5 days you won't even recognize your desk. It'll be as smooth as silk." "I'm not panicking, Davide," she replied, adjusting her sunglasses. "I'm just not used to men who keep their word and show up right on the dot at 9. For the next 4 days, the work in my shop on Oak Street was in full swing. I carefully stripped the damaged finish off the lower section of the legs, dried out the deep layers of wood under heat lamps to prevent mold, and began applying natural linseed oil and wax, coat after coat. The wood came alive right before my eyes, showing off a deep, rich tone, somewhere between amber and dark chocolate. By Thursday evening, as I was applying the final polish with a soft cloth, the shop door opened. Valentina walked into the space, which was heavy with the smell of wood shavings and oil. She walked quietly up to the desk, stood beside it, and ran her palm over the restored, perfectly smooth surface. "My God, Davide," she said softly, "it looks even better than when I was a kid. The water stains are completely gone." "Told you, it all comes down to patience and the right oil," I smiled, wiping the leftover wax from my hands. "And I reinforced the hidden compartment under the top. Your grandfather's letter is back where it belongs. It's part of this desk." Valentina turned to face me. In the dim light of the shop, where the warm evening sunset poured through the tall windows, her brown eyes looked remarkably warm. "You know, Davide," she said, opening the brown paper bag and breaking the pastry in half, "when I was standing in that miserable line at the post office, I thought it was the worst day of my month. Turns out Frank was just doing his job, taking his sweet time." I took my piece of pastry, catching the scent of cinnamon. "Just to give us enough time to realize the difference between bureaucracy and real patience." "Thank you," she said softly, taking a step toward me and looking straight into my eyes. "Not just for the desk, but for the way you take care of things, and people, without unnecessary words." "It's my job, Valentina," I answered, not breaking eye contact, "giving a second chance to things that are worth it." She let out a free, genuine smile, with no trace left of her past tiredness or defensive walls. She leaned in and brushed her lips gently against my cheek. It was a brief, simple second, but deeply sincere and warm, holding more promise than any words could. "Sunday at 10, by the fountain?" she asked from near the door. "10 sharp," I said firmly, "and coffee's on me." She stepped out, and I stayed in the shop, listening to the summer day fade away outside on the street. On my workbench sat the restored walnut desk. In my pocket was my usual block of basswood, and ahead of us waited another Sunday. Only this time, our usual coffee was going to taste entirely different.